Hey guys, welcome to Punky's World. I want to talk to you about how I keep my genealogy from driving me crazy. First of all, I try to, I'm going to put this back here, what are you doing? I just knocked something over there. Oh, it's headphones. Keep it in order by family. This here is just printouts of stuff. Let's see. Well, these are family notebooks that we've talked about before. Yeah, this is a report. We talked about this briefly. This was made about my family in Ireland from a company, and it was given to me by the person who paid for it, which was awfully nice. There we have it. Light on. Shed some light on the subject here. So this is definitely something you need to read through carefully. So put that aside. The rest of this are all worksheets that we talked about from Family Tree Magazine. Each month we kind of talk about whatever the subject, the main subject in the book is. Well, I keep all those pull-outs and things here. Like this is Scottish genealogy. This is Google for genealogy, source citations, historical newspapers. Should have been in that pile. Bloop. There we go. And then other things like records that were destroyed. These are articles that came from them, and that were online. That's what this stuff is, not that. That I printed. Because otherwise, you don't have access to them once you don't have a subscription anymore. They renewed my subscription automatically and screwed me up big time. I was not aware that they were renewing it on my, anyway. But this is the Family Tree magazines themselves. There's only 2 in here. I don't keep them all. If I did, I would be overrun. I have, to some degree, okay. Jane's brother would have been, yeah, that would have been about right. Harry, Michael, and Mary. So I have to research that. A little bit more to see if I can find his parents. You find some really interesting things, and if you're helping other people, it's important to have their stuff, you know, separated enough so you know. Like, I have Monica's stuff in here, but I know that this is different paper, for one thing, and I know who it is. Still looking for her dad. I'm gonna find it. Anyway, and I have Susan Martinson's stuff. It's actually underneath my mouse pad over there. Now I will tell you, as I probably told you before with this, that it's okay. Robert Forbes on the 20th of December, 1805, Norma. they had Peter, William, Grace, Joseph, okay. Search for the civil birth certificate for Marion Kennedy in 1873. Research result, and here it is. Daughter of Joseph, a laborer from Dairyland, and Rebecca, formerly Crow. Yep. Yep. And then Robert Kennedy, 1886, a Ballinary, son of Joseph. Okay, these are mostly Joseph's kids, which is fine, because I need them anyway. But I would have liked, anyway. Let's see. Rebecca was born, okay. Marriage of Joseph and Rebecca. And we come back here. Now I assume, and I shouldn't assume anything. Parish of Tatarkan. This was likely Joseph's father's land holding. Well, yeah, Robinson was their brother. He lived next door to his brother Joseph. His brother leased a house valued at 15s. I'm not, shillings? Shekels? I'm not 100% sure because of the time period. It might be shillings, but that seems like very little bit of money. And there's Brennan's right next door also. Baptized in 1844 in the Church of Ireland. Weaver married James Wilson, July 1850, and they had the following children, we know. Now this is where it gets confusing, because it says, Jane, daughter of Robert, a weaver, married Robert Brennan on 12 July 1851. But if you look here, you have my Jane, age 20, daughter of Robert, a weaver, marries James Wilson on 1 July 1850. Huh. Robert Kennedy, he was 60 years old, married and labored. The cause of death was recorded as paralysis. 2 weeks certified. The death was registered by Robert Kennedy, his son, who signed his mark, which is an X, because they didn't read or write. According to this record, he was born in 1806, which is consistent with their information about Robert. He was married at the time of his death, so Margaret died after. Well, yes. Sometime after her husband, according to information provided by the client. A search was undertaken and nothing was found. Of 2 records for women of the correct age. It was discovered the 2 individuals were spinsters at the time of their deaths. Okay. And then it tells them what sources. This is very interesting. I personally wouldn't pay for this report because a lot of it for me is redundancy. It may not have been for her, but a lot of it for me is redundancy because I already have the stuff. I was able to find the stuff. So, but if you don't have the stuff, you know, like this would be a good, I don't know how much it costs, thing to do for patients' purchase. Although I have a feeling they would come back with Zip Zap Zowie. And I would have paid for Zip Zap Zowie. But anyway. Yeah, some of this, like I said, is redundancy for me. I'm going to actually put it in here. Now, I do have other, okay, this is Mom's family. This is Farrington. What you can do sometimes, like this is Maine Wills and Probate Records, it's a list of everybody by that last name. And if you're lucky enough to get a middle initial, you can look these people up in the records and figure out who their parents were and figure out if they were, in fact, the other one says Stillman. It was probably Gilman. I don't know if those are the ages or the pages. No, they're the pages. Okay, these are the page numbers. Yeah, Stillman is Gilman. I love how my mother did this. I kept a lot of what she did, and this is her handwriting. I love looking at it because it just brings me closer to her, you know? It sounds silly, but it really does. You know, it's one of those things. I mean, do you have copies of your late loved one's handwriting? You know, I do right here. You know. Oops. Uh-oh. I also have copies of my great grandmother on my mother's side, her handwriting. Okay, these are all Burgess. Well, part of it is Burgess. And these are from one of the cemeteries in Connecticut. I did everything that I could Isn't that interesting? It's funny how, and you will see this in your tree, I can almost guarantee it. You will see surnames repeating themselves in different places. And it gets very confusing. Like, I've got Brennan repeating itself several times. I've got Symington. Two of Robinson's daughters married Symingtons. Or Symingtons. Because it's spelled Simmington or Symmington, or with one M. So, and then I see it here as one of the Kennedys is mentioned in the record for one of the Symingtons. So they all knew each other back in Canada. This is what my mother postulated. She said these families knew each other. They traveled in groups, just like the French did, and they intermarried into their groups that they, immigrated with. Because they stayed within the groups. And you're going to see that in some religious sects as well. In in some religions, the old-timey Catholics married Catholics. The Mormons typically marry Mormons. So you're going to notice that there's going to be relationships between families, particularly in the old days. Trying to think. And like I said, certain ethnic groups. The Irish, the French, the Italians, when they came over here, they stuck together. The Slovaks, same thing. They came here and they stuck in their groups, so they repeatedly married into the same families. You know, sisters would marry brothers and brothers would marry sisters, and cousins would marry sisters, and, you know, or brothers. And so, and then you have families, then you have situations in families where literally they intermarry within the family, which is not good, but they did it. They married cousins quite frequently. You will see that. I have a nephew and an aunt that are married to each other from way back in the day. I have another, they're cousins that are married. It's weird. Now, I don't have a problem if you're not first cousins, you know, and you grew up together and you know, because first cousins are more like a brother and sister, especially genetically. Ugh. Because you each share half your DNA with a sibling. Like, my cousin Dennis and I each share half of our DNA. He shares half his DNA with my father's brother, and I share half DNA with his father's brother. So I end up sharing a quarter of his father's DNA. Actually, a little more than that. It's like 30-something%, I think it came out as. But still, it's too much. But in the old days, they did that to keep bloodlines pure. All that did was create all kinds of genetic anomalies because the genetic pool wasn't big enough. So it created anomalies and bad things. That's why you'll see certain diseases in certain ethnic communities. Ashkenazi Jewish, Tay-Sachs is a big problem. Although they now have a test that they can do on the parents to make sure they're not carriers before they get pregnant. Because it's a horrible disease. It's also common in Russian and French Canadian groups. Those three ethnic groups tend to carry that particular gene. Russians probably because a lot of them actually are Jewish, so they may have Ashkenazi somewhere in there, but there are other things that the Jewish ethnicity carries because of their small genetic pool. And I'm not saying anything against them. I'm not saying, oh, they all married their cousins. What I'm saying is there aren't that many, so it's a small genetic pool. They don't marry outside of their ethnicity and their faith. So it's a small genetic pool because of that, not because of intermarrying or anything, although I'm sure it happened in every culture. But because of the small genetic pool, they've cropped up some genetic issues that are very rare, but they're there. They're more rare now than they once were because people are marrying you know, the pool is getting bigger, so to speak. French Canadians also have that disease, and Russians. Because I know a kid who was tested as a baby for the gene and had it, and his parents were like, huh? They said, well, Robin, you're half Russian. Oh, oops. with a decidedly Irish last name. So, again, a lot of ethnic groups stay together when they come to this country and marry within their ethnic group. Like I said, the Irish, the French Canadians, the Italians, particularly with the Italians, Northern Italians kind of stay to themselves, and Southern Italians kind of stay to themselves. One was considered, when they first came over here, one was considered better than the other by us for whatever possible reason. And I'm not even sure if it was north or south or what it was, but one group of Italians, whether it was the northern or southern, were considered better by the Americans for some odd, strange reason. And I don't remember which it was because I think the whole thing is ridiculous. And Sicilians were just Sicilians. They weren't even, but they were Italian. They are Italian, but they stayed within their Sicilian group. And like I said, the Irish stayed within the Irish, and that's why I have these names repeating themselves, Pete and repeat, over and over again in the trees, and you can just see it, over and over, Pete and repeat, and that makes it interesting, to say the least, and it makes it challenging, because you have to figure out, you have to connect everybody and connect the dots, and the dots are like, well, you know, the strings that they pull out, like if they're trying to solve a crime and they got their board up and they're pulling strings from here to here and here to there, and the strings are overlapping and it's a mess. Well, that's what it looks like. You have to take each one of those strings and figure out where everybody matches up to. So that is definitely something to watch out for in your genealogy. Also, if you are French or Irish, women are going to go by their middle names. If you can even find a woman's name. Because back in the day, like, I'll take my great-grandmother, for instance, if you looked her obituary up as Parmelia Bordeaux, or, I'm sorry, Parmelia Hemingway, her married name, well, in her case, you would find it because her husband was already dead. But anything before that, like when her husband died, the paperwork says Mrs. David Hemingway. It does not say her first name. You become Mrs. So-and-so. You no longer have a name. Which I'm sure the Duggars camp would like that very much, but the way they treat women. But, you know, their particular religious affiliation would like that very much. So yeah, I just think that, oh gosh, it's a tough thing to untangle, especially when I had a nephew that married his aunt. I'm like, what the? Actually, it wasn't his aunt. That's the confusing part. He married, was his grandmother's sister? I think it was his aunt's sisters. Some strange. Either way, no, because they were related to each other. But anyway, yeah, it becomes complicated, and then those lines just kind of tangle up, and it's like untangling a necklace, you know, taking the knot out of a necklace. So, I mean, those are the easiest sort of comparisons I can draw, like illustrations ways to illustrate it. Easiest ways to illustrate what happens. But women used their middle names. So if you look at a census and you see Sophie, and the woman's name that you knew was Geraldine, her name was either Sophie Geraldine or Geraldine Sophie. Probably Sophie Geraldine, because she would have been using her middle name. It was very, very common in the Irish. Irish women still do it, because I have a friend named Mary Kate, who goes by Kate. And she actually did help my mother with some of the Irish stuff. And that would be the meat. If it's done. Anyway, so, for example, on the French side, we had Aunt Delia and we had Uncle Albert. Well, we look at Aunt Delia's gravestone and guess what? She's Aunt Ida Delia. We look at Uncle Albert's death certificate and guess what? He's Uncle David Albert Phileas Hemingway. Okay, I understand why he's Albert, because his father was David, so they just called him by his middle name. But the women often used their middle names. I think you also have your, if you're dealing with Catholicism, you have your, the name that you choose for the saint or whatever. That's a whole other ball of wax, can of worms. But, oh, excuse me. Oh my goodness. Oh. So yeah, that's the deal. The other thing you're going to see a lot, especially in the Irish, is first names repeating themselves on repeat and repeat. It's like a broken record. Oh. The reason for that is very simple. They have a naming pattern. The oldest son is named after Grandpa. The next son is named after Dad. The next son is named after Dad's oldest brother. The next son is named after Dad's next brother. And so on and so forth. And then on the girl's side, same thing. First girl's named after Grandma. Second girl's named after Mom. Third girl's named after Mom's oldest sister, and so on and so forth. So you end up with a million jillion Robert Wilsons, a million jillion James Wilsons, and a million jillion John Wilsons, and the only way you can figure out who is by their middle initial or their date. At least that's how we've always done it. Which John? John Roy. No, that's John Charles. You know, and we'd have to do it that way because otherwise who? You know? This is old John, the one that died in 1900, you know. Some way of distinguishing each John. Because I literally have John and Sarah, John and Lena, John and Norma, and Jack. Jack is actually Jack. But it's like, oh my goodness. And then, of course, some of their children have children named John. And then, of course, you have Robert, which is in two lines of the family, because you have my grandfather, well, you have the great-grandfather Robert. Then you have the great-grandfather, okay, Robert Kennedy. Then you have his daughter, who was my grandfather's mother. No, grandmother. Anyway, you have Robert Kennedy. Then you have my grandfather, well, no, then you have his grandson, Robert Wilson. his grandson Thomas, who had a son Robert, who had a son Robert, my dad, who had a son Robert, my grandfather, who had a son Robert, my dad. But you also have um, James and Jane's son Robert, who had a son Robert. And it's like, oh my God, you know. Plus, there are about 1 million other families that did the same damn thing. So, and we have a lot of juniors in our family, and some that aren't juniors because they don't have the same middle name. Like my cousin David is not a junior because he doesn't share a middle name with his dad. But his son is a junior. So we have 3 Davids. Uncle David, David Allen, and DJ. And it's like, it's the only way you can separate them, you know. But it's a common thing in families, particularly who are, well, either Irish or French, because the French tend to send names down through the generations too. My name is one of them. Narcisse, or Nelson in English, is another name that's gone down through the generations in the family. Like I said, my name Angelina has gone down through several generations. Trying to think. Ludger, you know, other names, and you go, okay, which one is which? You know, because the French kind of did this. They didn't have the same naming pattern, but they did the same kind of thing. So I hope this helps you not rip your hair out when you're looking through records and stuff, because I think naming patterns are important, and it's something we don't talk about. I believe the Scottish name pretty much the same way as because my family was Scottish and Irish. Some of them were actually born in Scotland, and I believe they have the same naming pattern. But thank you so much for joining me. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I will see you tomorrow. Bye, guys. Please subscribe. We're trying to get to 100. Thank you so much.